The nature of what we're talking about is that 25% of people are comfortable knowingly sharing disinformation as a means to facilitate change. And so when you've got not just state actors, vested interested groups and those with, activist groups with agendas, but also a large swathe of the population now operating in the information environment in a false manner to drive some sort of agenda, to try and facilitate some sort of change, you've really got what is now, and again, what a lot of corporates in comms and marketing haven't quite got the grasp of, a deeply adversarial and hostile environment. And you need to be operating and thinking in that way.
Woo, welcome. You have now entered Mad Warfare, mutually assured distraction, where we explore the weird, terrifying, and sometimes hilarious ways war is fought today, and how we can all protect our minds before we go too mad to find them.
Oh my!
Dangerous pattern. Dangerous pattern. Dangerous pattern.
Okay, you talk if you haven't got a brain.
Dangerous pattern. Dangerous pattern. Dangerous pattern.
Welcome back. Today on Mad, we're asking, how do you prevent people from spreading lies about you? Or effectively countering them in smear campaigns, if and when they do come out? This isn't just a strategy for dealing with a crappy ex. It's a big business initiative that has implications for all of us. I'm Jocelyn Brady.
Don't be fooled by the voice. This is still Sean Anthony Guillory.
And today, our guest is a former British intelligence officer where he could be found smiting Her Majesty's enemies in the cognitive domain. As you do, he now brings that experience to help boardrooms worldwide navigate the chaos of the current information environment. At Edelman, he leads the U.S. Counter Disinformation Unit, helping companies defend against lies that could cost millions or worse. Please welcome Simon Paterson.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having me. It's an absolute pleasure to be here.
Simon, I'm so curious. This is your words. I loved them so much I stole them. But you went from smiting the Crown's enemies to countering threats for corporations. What was that journey like? How does it compare?
Yeah, well, do you know what? What's probably most fascinating and interesting was there wasn't really much of a beat missed. It wasn't surprising nor shocking. So I spent a number of years operating in this space, and one of the things that I found absolutely astonishing is the amount of tactics and approaches and strategies that I had seen or faced working against violent extremist groups that were now starting to permeate into domestic politics, into marketing, and actually even those of state level actors were starting to become part of course in terms of operating in the information environment. So really, it's probably more troubling than helpful. It really wasn't much of a step change, if I'm honest. There was different priorities, different focus areas, and having just spoken recently actually with someone in defence who was asking me, well, how can we best measure effect and impact? One of the advantages of being in the corporate space is that's very easy because we're all about the money. So if it's hitting the top line, if it's hitting the bottom line, if it's making the markets move, we've got some effect. So really in that regard is probably the most distinct difference, I think, between trying to operate in an ideological space, in a societal level, or supporting defence on operations to that in the corporate area.
So you're seeing measure of effect, as Sean likes to tell us a lot, how important that is, measures of effect in the business or corporate space that we don't normally see in the government space. Yeah, well, just very clear metrics, because ultimately, what is the role of business? It's to make money. And if that's being impacted, you've got a very clear indicator as to whether or not something's gone wrong somewhere. And then this is a mouthful, so I want to ask you about this. The leading the U.S. Counter Disinformation Unit. It sounds cool, doesn't it? Doesn't it sound cool? Backbends. Yeah. It's yeah, but at the very least, it gets me a lot of meetings and gets me on podcasts. So I can't really complain. But I think that we've been doing this sort of work for years. So a lot of the ways in which we do it now is different. But I think what has changed is the market.
the market and the recognition of the challenges faced in mis and disinformation have grown. And you've seen that in the fact that the World Economic Forum are constantly banging on about how important and how much of a serious risk mis and disinformation is. You've seen it in recent UN risk reports. You've seen it in the OECD coming out with a number of different articles talking about the challenges of mis-disinformation to society more broadly. So I think really what we've done is effectively consolidate, build and invest in a distinct offering and team and set of skills. Without sounding like Liam Neeson, we've got a unique set of skills across Edelman, which we're able to sort of pull together and under the stewardship of those that have operated in this space. And I think that's the key word, operated, because there's a lot of people who've read a book in comms that now seem to think they can do interesting mis and disinformation work. That we're able to bring to bear the 6,000 staff across the world that we have and the various different capabilities across earned and social and digital and out of home and advertising and creative. So really it's a bit of a toy chest that I've got, being able to help our clients stave off and get ahead of the issues of outright falsehood driven by intent, but driven by an agenda as defined in disinformation. So yeah, I would say though, there was some debate internally about the name, and I know I'm talking to learned people when it comes to sort of the lexicon of this. I personally can't stand the word counter, and I know that's probably not where you thought I was going to start, but you can take the man out of the military, but you can't take the military out of the man. And I must say, I find it deeply reactive, responsive. It seeds the initiative to take a posture of waiting for something to happen, because you can't counter something until it's happened. And so the irony is that what I counsel my clients on, what we counsel our clients on, is actually to take a proactive, preemptive approach to mis and disinformation and to really get a grip and finally own their risk in the reputational space, in the information space, because for years they've gotten away with treating issues and crisis in this space like a light switch that they can just toggle on and off as and when something's happened. But the game has changed and the playbooks need to change.
How would you describe that change? Like, what do you need to be more vigilant about? And how do you spot lies before they spread?
Yeah, so I think it's not necessarily about spotting. The information, the understanding is a key component. And I think what we need to get beyond in the business world is just focusing on those that are generating revenue for us, or our potential customers, or our current customers, or important stakeholders for us, and move beyond that and understand that there is an entire network outside of those specific constituents that are influencing them. And so it's actually about moving one or two bounds outside of where we're already messaging, where we're already targeting in terms of our campaigns and marketing and communications, to influence the influencers. And I mean that in the broader sense of influence rather than necessarily individuals. Because without doing that, without then using the wonderful technology and vendors that are out there to understand how information moves between groups, to understand where there might perhaps be intervention points, where there might be trigger moments that moves from one particular community to another, or across platforms, or even from platforms into media, into podcasts, into the policy arena. Unless you understand what that looks like, you're not going to be able to make informed decisions. And they're never going to be perfect because there's a lot of variables. But we have in military planning what we call doctrinal templates. And really what I try to build with this information is an understanding of, okay, if I see a recce element here, well, I know that the main brigade artillery is about this far away. And thinking about the information environment, well, actually, they're probably in and around this community here or in and around this group here, and will take X amount of time to move from, A to B. And so applying that same principle doesn't give you accuracy, but it helps inform decision. But it helps give you at least a framework that you can apply as and when you see an issue or a particular problem or vulnerability starting to develop. And what I would add to that as well is actually when you asked about lies, Jocelyn, I think it's also recognizing, again, when I say taking ownership for your risk, what narratives are going to be damaging to you. Work it out. It's not, don't let someone else decide that for you. Work out what is going to really be truly damaging to your license to operate, your ability to do business, and then work out where that's going to come from. It's not going to be perfect, but work out where that's going to come from. Work out what the inverse of that is. To defend against that, what do you need to demonstrate? How do you need to talk? With whom do you need to communicate? And you build resilience ahead of time so that if a group was to mobilize against you to spread a lie, a falsehood, and push it through either, through organic virality or through some concerted campaign or effort, that your key constituents are already pre-armed. They're going to turn around and go, well, that's nonsense. I mean, I know what the deal is. They've been clear and transparent with me. I've got that trust and I've got that loyalty with the brand, and they'll ignore. And so you actually stave off the issue before it actually becomes a problem.
So it sounds like a lot of that work, as preventive as they can get, and not when just their hair's on fire, is almost trying to help them map out their narrative assets or their narrative topology, which is, again, like real interesting.
I imagining all the possible stories that could bolster or break trust.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, something like flings, if you think of it as a tower, if it like flings towards that one, that may be okay, versus that has a whole water supply. That's not good. So
and it's dominoes as well. So what might, for the ideal outcome for me is you know when a domino's been flipped, you start to see the chain reaction, but because you're prepared and you understand where the domino row is, you pick one out the middle and suddenly it doesn't keep moving, it stops in its tracks. So that's the sort of ideal outcome. But I think more broadly on a strategic level, I think it was best described to me by a wonderful academic out of Cambridge as almost similar to the early days of climate change. That actually everyone, as I mentioned, lots of learned organizations really understand there's a risk, there's a threat, there's a problem, but no one's doing anything about it.
Gotcha.
And that's partly because they're kind of like, well, it's not hurt me, or it hasn't impacted me, or it probably won't hit me. And to try and stretch the analogy of climate change as far as it can humanly go, I tend to tell businesses, look, you're all on a floodplain, right? This information environment is a floodplain. It's not if, it's when. And you can make the decision. You can either invest in insurance and rebuild when you get wiped out, or you can build flood defenses. And for me, that's that sort of the analogy of what I've sort of described in terms of the advocacy for being a bit more proactive and preemptive in this space.
So in terms of the government space, when it comes to things around information operations, we're going to have the opposite problem where we have a whole bunch of different groups, be it like information operations or strategic communication or SIOP, that kind of want to own that message. But there's folks who want to own that capability. My experience probably 3 years ago was going out to these different companies and selling things around like disinformation and whatnot. And it wasn't the cyber people were like, that's not me. Maybe that's like a marketing or PR. You go to marketing and PR, like, I don't know if that's like us either. And there wasn't companies that kind of wanted to kind of take ownership of that. And it kind of just got tossed around like a hot potato until it fell. I just kind of wanted to hear your experience in terms of like, are there certain departments that you feel like you've had like really good like inroads in, or if there's even departments that you wish would hear it out before the big kind of climate disaster kind of happens?
Yeah, it's I'm going to sound very consultancy here, Sean. It's a mixed bag. It depends, right? And I think what my experience has been is that with any innovation, with any new approach, there are always leaders and laggards. And the laggards are always in the majority at the back end of any sort of innovation cycle. So those that are more sophisticated, arguably those that know they're more exposed, are those that obviously are more open to having a conversation about what can be done to sort of fortify their positions. I think also that we can't discount the wider factors, whether it's society large and the sort of changing and evolution of the information environment over what has only been the last few years, where people are starting to really feel the squeeze and the issue of misinformation in the corporate space, I should say. I know government's been dealing with it for years. And I think one of the great challenges that I have is exactly as you detail, Sean, is who do you talk to? Because the approach that I advocate for is deeply strategic, it's long term, it's high cost, because that's how you get quality and that's how you get consistency. And you don't build trust amongst key communities overnight. And so it does require a slightly strategic, longer term view, which typically sits more at the board and the C-suite level. but certainly a lot of comms professionals, certainly, those that are more switched on to this sort of thing. But to drive your point home, Sean, about there being a difference of views, if you take deepfakes as an example, often the first person that will get an eye on a deepfake targeting a brand or a senior executive of a company will be the CISO or the IT team or the cyber team. And do you know what? Very rarely are they plugged directly into the comms team. And where's the harm? The harm is reputational. There's obviously potential fraud at play as well, but it's also significantly reputational. And often the comms people are the last people to really find out that something's happened.
Is there a specific example or something? I've worked with a lot of fintech and insurance, large insurance companies. And so to me, it's easy to imagine, well, in light of what happened in the States a few months ago, there's a lot of ire against health insurance companies, and it would be very easy to spread any information about them that's not flattering. So I feel like an insurance company would be amenable or understand the risk and say, listen, we don't want people lying about how often we deny claims or how poorly we treat customers or something to that effect. But can you tell us a story or something very concrete to help us imagine everything that goes into the thinking around this?
Yeah, so I think it's interesting you raise the healthcare sector, because actually I've got an example from there that I can perhaps unpack a little bit. But there are, obviously I'm not naming names. Goodness me, I don't tell tales out of school, Sean. So I think there are certain sectors for sure, Jocelyn, that are more predisposed to this. And the example I'm thinking of is a pharmaceutical firm, and this is a classic example of misinformation, right? There was a number of consumers that had a bit of an adverse effect to a medication. They complained that actually these side effects weren't factored onto the side of the medication. The company had done everything that it was obliged to do in terms of regulations. It had been approved. It had gone through all the right processes and everything else. It was a regulated medication, so it had heavy scrutiny on it. It was operating globally as well, so it's not just one regulator had signed off on it. But they held it directly responsible for an adverse effect. And they coalesced and they found each other and they built and they started digging into the research. They did their own research. I don't know if you ever heard that phrase before. I don't know if it's a spoiler as to what might come.
Unfortunately, yes.
Yeah. So I feel like you're running ahead of me now with this story. But basically, they were highly successful and they managed to get some tier one media coverage. They hit which in itself had an impact on the share price. And they had people who were worried going into clinicians and asking questions that they'd read on the internet, which is nothing a professional or an expert wants to hear. It's like, I read this on a Facebook group, tell me about X, Y, Z, is there a risk? Is there a problem here? And so it turned into a real challenge, and because it was a huge product for this particular company. And so by being smart, by applying a lot of the principles and the approaches, which I sort of outlined earlier, not only were we able to get sort of early warning of activist movements, campaigns, initiatives, or pushes into specific media outlets, but we were also able to really safeguard the wider community, the key stakeholders, those clinicians, those people that influence the clinicians. And, not in a manipulative sense, but where do they get their information? How do they assess that information? And by being smart in that way, we were able to reassure, we were able to educate, we were able to raise wider awareness. And importantly, for those that were feeling a little bit under the cosh, being constantly challenged in their clinics, able to empower and to inform in a way that they themselves can then communicate to their patients about the actual risks and challenges. So, and that actually resulted in the product growing in triple digits, and also the clinicians maintaining around an 80% confidence in the product as well. So we had some real good results as a result of that.
Yeah, I'm guessing if they went even earlier, gotten to you again, it could have.
If only, Sean.
So, yeah.
Honestly, the amount of times I get
if only.
Yeah, the amount of times I get wheeled out
it's
when
their hair's already on fire.
Yeah. So I actually say, funnily enough, I have two phones at home, and I've got a young child and an 8-year-old, and I've got my personal phone, as those that are watching this will see, it's got a green cover, and then my work phone, which you see is a very vibrant red, and
it's red.
You don't talk to Daddy when Daddy's on his red phone, that's for sure. So goodness.
What do you wish more businesses knew about this? So it sounds like, we're talking about a growing awareness or appreciation for why this work is so important. But is there anything else you wish more businesses would pay attention to or just were aware of?
Yeah, so I think two things. One, I don't necessarily think it's their fault for those that aren't engaged in this.
Of course, yeah.
The research in this area is woeful, utterly woeful. And I think the only thing that I found that is actually of any sort of good quality and really helps start the conversation is out of the economics department at Toulouse University. And they did a study that looked at known fake news that were targeting the tech sector in particular. And they conducted a macroeconomic study of the impact of that fake news. And they found that actually there was a 6 to 18 month tail in terms of an impact on employment, on supply side buying decisions, on wider investment amongst that business community. And I just think what needs to happen is we move it out of this constant obsession in the societal political realm of the impact of misinformation, and we start quantifying it and making the case for the economic damage, because we're not making much progress in terms of a systemic change because of the politics, because it's actually quite helpful for all sides of the political spectrum to have a slightly cluttered, messy information ecosystem. It's really that you don't need to trade off to do this well. I think there's a feeling, especially in the current environment where budgets are strapped, where actually the two of the departments that get hit hardest if people are reining in belts is comms and marketing. You don't have this investment that I'm asking for, this strategic view that I'm asking for doesn't need to be additional budget. It can be part of your promotion. It can be part of your awareness raising and your normal day-to-day marketing efforts. You just need to start thinking in the lens of how to mitigate in a positive, indirect way the risks that you have spent a bit of time thinking about in terms of the narratives and the groups that might come after you. So there is a bit of additional spend in terms of mapping that environment, preparing the battlefield, as it were. But actually beyond that, the execution doesn't have to eat into things that you're already doing. It can be an addition, it can be a value add to it. It might be just a slight adjustment or change or retargeting or an additional audience you might look to involve in a conversation. So really there are smart ways of doing more with less, as it were, but it's not to disguise the fact that there will need to be more investment, but it's not this massive package, multi-year package that you need to find as an aside and go and plea at the C-suite or board level for.
Usually the first thing emergency is cut is usually around communications and marketing, and if anything, that's when budget needs to be going up.
This new approach and strategy is nascent. It's not something that's necessarily, fully, people have got their arms around it as much as one would hope. So there is a lot of that, but again, I think people come to agencies to help them execute against things often that they know. They go to consultancies to come up with new stuff. And I think, it's a recognition that there really isn't much of a difference now between a consultancy and a communications agency.
How do you explain to a C-suite, for example, how you're different from, or you sort of touched on this, but how do you compare to PR and crisis comms?
We are PR and crisis comms, Jocelyn. So I think we don't. I think we are an important part to it. We're a distinct part, but we are part of the whole. So actually, what is quite difficult, and actually you raise an interesting point in terms of differentiation. Often from a preparation perspective, it won't look too dissimilar what we're recommending as to what you would get with a normal traditional crisis and risk program, because you need to update your playbooks. You need to have a process. You need to understand what tools and what triggers and what categorization and who you need to drag into the meeting, etc., to have a conversation about what we're going to do. So actually the playbooks, the sort of crisis simulations and trainings that we would ordinarily run for corporates, the fundamentals are all still the same. It's just the execution, the detail, the context, and the process that gets changed. So I suppose certainly, given you've got a lot of defense members in your audience, if you think about it in terms of the distinction between the nature of war and the character of war, there are still some core components that will always endure and maintain, but the tactics and strategies and the approaches will invariably change over time with the advent of new technology and advancements and whatnot.
How do you sell the value of that? That's like probably the timeless question, but how do you sell the value of long-term reputation management, risk management, trust?
Oh, I mean, just look at our societies today. I think actually, I think what I really struggle with is when
you see that burning. Yes. Do you want to be like that?
Yeah, I think what I really struggle with is when people talk about election interference in the information environment, the complete, and I'd love for you to challenge me on this if you think I'm talking nonsense, is that actually a lot of people question the effectiveness because they don't see it necessarily having swayed toward one candidate or another, or they can't necessarily draw a correlating line between what they're told was efforts to undermine democracy in the process and everything else to some sort of tangible output or success. And so I find myself having to remind people that actually adversaries that are looking to do this, this isn't a one-time thing. They've been trying this for decades. And actually, much like a beverage company, say someone who's trying to sell fizzy drink, when it comes to Christmas time, they invest heavily. They might tell you that Santa's coming or Christmas time is coming, and there might be trucks driving around and whatnot, and they'll boost their budgets. They'll go big. They'll hit loads of channels. They'll hit loads of audience and messaging and marketing spend and out of home and generate activations and events all over the shop for that period of time. But what's their mission? Their mission's still just to sell stuff. It just so happens that at that moment in time, you have an event that you can coalesce around, that it's worth investing in to drive that change. Now, the mission of adversaries has always been to undermine democracies and their institutions and to sow distrust between politics, society, institutions, and society. That mission hasn't changed for the last 50 odd years. It just so happens that elections are the Christmas time for disinformation operatives in foreign climes. So again, it's just, anyway, rant over. I'll stop there. But I don't know what do you think about that?
The folks that are really kind of tasked around like the information operations or kind of like foreign interference, they'll look for it in terms of, again, like stuff that's CONUS, they'll point to stuff outside continental U.S. and things like that. But for all the stuff where the call is coming from inside the house, one is not anybody looking at that, and two, folks are deathly afraid of maybe trampling on things in terms of First Amendment kind of free speech rights or things like that. And there's plenty of things where even kind of like recent like released things like Tenet Media or whatnot, where Russia was paying folks in terms of like trusted kind of voices within the United States to kind of like talk about different things. So the things were especially, again, when it's coming from inside the house and inside your country, that kind of stuff isn't addressed. And that is a 365-day, 24/7 sort of thing.
It's like America is always these two big businesses at war rather than one unified company or culture. And that is to our disservice, right? How do we deal with a country and a government who is allergic to even the term misinformation and disinformation? How do we even start to address it if that's something people are scared to talk about?
Yeah. Well, I think, see previous point. I think, let's move it out of the political and societal realm and move it into the economic. People can agree that they don't like losing money. People can agree that actually for every lie around a FEMA response that then requires you to deploy extra security is costing the taxpayer. That every time that there's, some increase in vaccine hesitancy around measles and you end up having to instigate reactive responses, it costs money. And so actually there is a very strong economic case to be made, especially in the US, where we're terrified of the budget deficit and the direction that it's going in and the potential wider implications that could have. This could be very much a bipartisan approach to cleaning up the information ecosystem and making the case that this isn't about damaging free speech. This is about national security. And it's not because of issues, it's because of money. Now, I work in New York, the beating heart of the capital world. And so I can't think of a finer place where that message would resonate. But we need the research. We need people to come forward with that. We need vocal people to advocate for it. And at the minute, it's somewhat of a nascent movement. You might be looking at it right now, actually.
Say when I was like, before I got into national security, you may still find vestiges of this online. I was the sales scientist. I was helping out around like the psychology of sales and sales marketing and sales strategy and things like that. And even when it came to trying to do like research in the academic space, take one model that was pretty popular. I don't know how popular it is nowadays, like the challenger sales model, where some of it is about getting folks into like an emotional kind of like drowning kind of place. I can get that past IRBs. And then same thing with like social engineering kind of work, that kind of thing where institutional review boards. So for academic research that you do want to publish, to help out to make sure what you're doing is ethical, they will have people review it at an institutional review board to make sure, again, you're not doing like the next Tuskegee experiment, so to speak. But even things that kind of take deception to kind of to study, like a social engineering and even sales, where you're trying to get them like, ooh, actually, that is kind of a scary kind of proposition. It was hard, at least at the time, getting these things past IRBs, let alone stuff around misinformation, disinformation. I want to hear from academics themselves if they feel like some of the things that may be taking away from getting external validity or ecological validity, and that would mean like being able to test things that are like real life scenarios. I wonder if some of the stuff in terms of the review boards that could be at play. And then the other thing I'm curious about, I have heard, and this is even from a few episodes ago with Swapnil Meta, where it seems like he's had like a good relationship with places like Meta and Facebook to share their data that they have on their side, so he can do some work around that, including on the product side. I would think, again, like there's plenty of, the social media kind of places and these different kind of mediums have all this data, and for different sort of things, some of it probably even CYA, they may not want to share the data. So I think in terms
Cover your
of
ass.
access to, thank you. So for the viewers out there that don't know CYA, in terms of like getting access to those very prime data sets, and then I wonder how much research can be done, at least in an academic setting, that is like closer to real life. Those are the two things I want. And then there's just funding in general. Oh my goodness, especially in terms of current environment, just making sure these folks have the funding to do the research. I probably put those as like the top three. And this is advocacy, again, like things that help that out. To get to the kind of research I think y'all would probably better need.
I mean, Sean, this is starting to sound more like the disinformation equivalent of Live Aid. Please, if you could just send any money in to help fund this research, just
bring Freddie Mercury back.
You say that, Sean. I reckon you could rock the tash. I reckon you could pull it off. You really could.
I mean, if we have the budget, put the little stash right here.
But you inadvertently triggered me in two ways with your last thing. Not in a serious way, not in an American triggering way, in a very British triggered way. But I think that the first one is, don't be ashamed of your work in sales, Sean. It's okay. Just to reassure you. Because actually, that's also where I started, funnily enough, and no other than the corporate executive board where the Challenger sales model was built and developed. So I just found it quite amusing how there's a bit of a crossover there, and I do wonder whether or not it's because actually good salespeople or people who understand sales, what is it? It's fundamentally negotiation and persuasion. And I think who are those that are probably most successful within the information operations space? People who can persuade. And I think that's probably a bit of a natural path there. On the research side, you're absolutely right. I know plenty of academics, a lot of academics in this space. It's one of those words that is now verboten. It's not allowed in grants anymore because the threat and the risk of being targeted. You saw the GEC getting defunded and rolled into other departments and organizations. And so, you could argue not only have we got a real challenge in research in terms of the grants and the money that's available, I fear that the work in this space, and again, I don't want to talk to all of it because it's a very broad field, But if I have to read another study about inoculation, I might go insane. Because again, I think one of the challenges we have here is practicality. Like, yeah, great, your lab studies are showing real successes here. We've been talking for decades about the importance of financial literacy in our societies to help people, make better sense of their money and everything else. In what is, again, I'll bring it back to money, it's a fairly non-controversial or contentious area that mass education in this area would potentially have huge benefits. And we've failed in most, if not all, nations. So to suggest that we're able to roll out some sort of enormous media literacy, critical thinking campaign in a way that's going to turn the handle from the person's perspective, from the individual's perspective, to counter against mis and disinformation, I think it's utter farce. So again, I just think there needs to be a more realistic approach to thinking about how we can mitigate, manage, respond, counter, that's couched in the reality of human experience and your average normal day-to-day life, as opposed to sort of lab experiments, which are interesting, does inform and move the conversation forwards, but have very little practical application.
It's like more real life pilots and things like going out and field experiments rather than lab work.
Oh, for sure.
Not to put more on your plate.
So we'll solve it all together, Sean. Let's keep going.
Like one thing I did in terms of, again, like the sales psychology and kind of like even like the data science around sales and marketing, a lot of things in sales are just like, they're natural experiments in and of themselves in terms of, okay, difference between email or social selling or hitting the phones or even meet these people in person. You can kind of set these up naturally in terms of, all right, do 2 of those 4 today and see how your results are, and kind of like, so I was able to do a lot of natural experiments. But here's the thing, they didn't see the light of day per the customers we worked with on this. So they had that data, they were able to do good science, but those are insights they kind of kept to themselves. I wonder with all the kind of customers and the things that y'all touch at Edelman, I don't know if you kind of have like that research or kind of like components of that. I wonder if you could have like almost a research wing that would, again, all of it would be declassified and whatnot, but where you could get some of those insights from some of the things you're doing with customers, and then you be solving your own problem, I suppose, in terms of putting like the best sort of research. Not sharing everything. Some of it you may want to keep as like IP or secret sauce, but
yeah, well, I think yes, in an ideal world, Sean. The challenge we have there really is that there are silos between different accounts and projects and everything else for good reasons, for privacy and our clients obviously don't want things getting too blurred together. But also it's then we are a business, the underlying profit motive of it. Does that exist? Does it make sense to create that research arm? So I don't disagree with you. I think that would be really insightful. And one of the challenges in this space is the siloing of these experiences, the outcomes and the solutions. But it also would require a standard approach for it to actually make sense. And so again, I think so many instances are quite distinct or unique, partly because you're obviously working with different people in each instance and they're asking different things and they want different things, that actually there isn't really going to be a line that you can pull through that would be hugely consistent, would be my concern in terms of the approach itself.
Well, speaking of Edelman research that does exist, can you tell us more about the trust barometer? And I understand it's painting a pretty bleak picture right now, but just what goes into that and to your gleaning from it?
Gosh, Jocelyn, the trust barometer. I being an employee, and those from Edelman will know, you're contractually obliged in all conversations to at least make one reference to the trust barometer. And that probably explains why I'm simply not invited to dinner parties anymore, I'll be honest. But yeah, you're absolutely right. For those that haven't come across it before, it's 25 years worth of research. We've been doing this for 25 years, looking to understand at a global level, and by global we mean sort of major 28 markets, the change, the iteration, the movement, the drivers that underpin trust. And fundamentally, some of the consistent areas is looking at trust in government, trust in media, trust in business, trust in NGOs, etc., and looking at that across a wide breadth of areas. So some of the I dare call them highlights, standouts. Let's call them standouts because it's all a bit bleak, as you said, Jocelyn.
Okay.
Is really areas like we are now in a period of quite significant grievance. People are not happy. They feel detached. They feel underrepresented. They feel the gap which we know exists between those that have and those that have not. And obviously a lot of this is more profound in places like the US where that sort of wealth disparity is really quite significant. And I think some of the standouts for me were this year we saw averaging around 69% of people believe that government leaders, business leaders, and journalists and reporters purposely mislead them. Nearly 70% of people believe those groups that are supposed to be authorities and experts purposely mislead them. So we have seen the collapse of authority, really, authority figures in the ability to sort of communicate messages in a credible, truthful manner. What we also saw, and this is something is a trend I picked up on last year, but continues throughout, is really the challenge around 74% of people trust experts as much as they trust people like me. So your Susan PhDs is as trusted as Bob from the bar. And that's not to say that we need to jettison the Susans. It just means you need more Bobs. Because when you're talking from a government perspective or a brand perspective, you need to have authentic voices. You need to have a lot more of them. You can't rely on a single source or even just a couple of credible authoritative sources. You need to build that broad net. And what I call, I suppose those in the communications world appreciate, everyone used to go on about how top-down communications is dead. It's all about horizontal communications now. I'd say that's been dead for 10 years. And actually, those that are being most successful is using and creating the model of a network of networks. And I think unless you're already operating like that or you're thinking in that way today, you're onto a hiding, quite frankly, in terms of your response to any issue or problem sort of moving forwards. I honestly could talk about this for hours, Jocelyn, just because it's in my waking dreams. But the last thing that I think I'd want to emphasize from the report, again, which was a real standout for me, was that 4 in 10 now believe in hostile activism as a means to facilitate change. And the way in which we categorize that is things like attacking people online directly, and that was at 27%. Threats of physical violence, and I think, you referenced the pharmaceutical industry, Jocelyn. I think, we saw that in New York manifest in the United Healthcare CEO assassination and murder, and then the subsequent praise that came from that, or the jubilation that came from certain segments of society following that. And then you've also got the comfort with attacking property. And I think, again, an example of that, regardless of what you think about Elon, and I have some very particular views, which I shan't share, is, the firebombing of Tesla forecourts. Now, the poor people working there, it's not their decision, it's not their politics necessarily, but apparently that's now something that is more comfortable within large proportions of society. And the last one, I've kept this to last because the nature of what we're talking about, is that 25% of people are comfortable knowingly sharing disinformation as a means to facilitate change. And so when you've got not just state actors, vested interested groups, and those with, activist groups with agendas, but also a large swathe of the population now operating in the information environment in a false manner to drive some sort of agenda, to try and facilitate some sort of change, you've really got what is now, and again, what a lot of corporates in comms and marketing haven't quite got the grasp of, a deeply adversarial and hostile environment. And you need to be operating and thinking in that way.
So increasingly, people do not trust so-called experts, authorities, leaders, and increasingly they think that firebombing, murdering, and lying are okay ways to deal with people they don't like.
It's a wonderful world, Jocelyn.
What do we do?
I mean, I've been looking at bunkers, Jocelyn. I don't know about you, but I can't afford the one to New Zealand.
Borrow one from Zuck.
Yeah, this is it.
Yeah.
But no, I think that there are things, and actually some of the solution I've sort of already alluded to. I just think there's not going to be a policy or regulatory solution to this in the near term. Business needs to step up to fill the void. And again, we see that in our trust barometer work, that actually business is consistently seen as a leader, as a driver of change. I think just by nature of being able to make decisions and execute much faster than government. And I think I attribute the sort of staid, slow, often perceived to be self-interest of government to be one of the driving factors of a lot of the grievance that we're seeing. But even though business is driven by a profit motive, they're driven by a profit motive that's inspired by the consumer. And so if the consumer wants to see something or communicates that they want a business to operate in a certain way, it really doesn't take a huge amount of pressure to push them in that direction or to gain some sort of commitment or some sort of effort. So really, I think that's why business still has a very significant, if not a crucial role. Because even though I've sort of poo-pooed and was really rather mean, and I'm sorry to any researchers operating in the inoculation space, but I think the only way I can see this scaling is if, and no one's going to like me for this, it becomes part of your corporate mandated training, right? That much like your cybersecurity, that you have to sit there and your eyes glaze over and you're trying to click through the video as quickly as humanly possible and then answer the questions the third time round because you hadn't watched the video properly. I think there's probably a case as part of whether it's a health and wellness or a security or a reputational protection measure to have employees engage in this, understand how they might be manipulated or defrauded in a similar way to social engineering, but with wider understanding of information integrity and manipulation.
But make it fun.
Exactly. Gamify it.
Make these trainings fun.
Yes, absolutely.
If anybody needs anybody to help on that, yours truly. And also, thinking about companies stepping in and, if you will, brands. Hear my segue coming. We talked a little bit earlier before this podcast, before this recording, we were talking about brand America. And this is something I think we could all use more discussing, if thinking about America as a brand and what is America's story and what are we standing for and how are we personified, how are we perceived, and how that has over time and what we are to do about it. If there's what are your thoughts on brand America?
Goodness, Jocelyn, not content with trying to have me solve the world's problems of disinformation, you're now trying to have me solve that. So no, absolutely, no, it's a great question. And I think one of I saw a really interesting piece of research coming out of Morning Consult, and it basically made the point that America's reputation has obviously been hit pretty hard with current decisions that have affected the world, really. I don't think there is anyone that's been untouched by some policy making and decision making that's taken place by the current administration. The only time they've seen such a dip is during an actual armed conflict that the US is involved in. And that just gives you a sense of scale, I think, and an impact on the reputational side of things. I think not only have you got that, but because of the nature of the issues, whenever you call something war has collateral. So I do think the term trade war is probably pretty apt because there's collateral. And what is the collateral? The collateral is business in a lot of instances. And I think our own research, we have various different iterations of, guess what, the trust barometer. Yes, yeah, I don't get paid by the mention, unfortunately. But the last bit of work we did a distinct cut looking at brands. So again, not Brand USA, but this is relevant. And it showed that actually there's been a huge drop off of trust towards foreign, which in the definition is really non-domestic brands. And that is most pronounced within developed economies. So obviously those that have more disposable income to spend and therefore are more important for a lot of multinational businesses. And obviously one of the huge strengths of the American economy is the international nature of a huge number of its very large corporations. And so it doesn't take much to go from the fact that actually there's this drop in trust towards foreign-owned businesses and a focus on domestic. There's this to then in markets where there's not as strong or robust rule of law in terms of copyright infringement or in terms of the ability to take legal recourse against, reputational harm for unscrupulous competitors, for potentially even state actors, to go after what is a driver of the American economy, which is major American businesses. And so I have a real concern that actually we're going to see a huge uptick in the targeting of US business. And we are seeing a lot of instances of this in Latin America. We're seeing it over in APAC. I'm taking calls almost every other day that there's another major brand that's getting hit by some salacious, made-up falsehood, some sort of, bot amplified or AI enabled bit of content that's doing the rounds, portraying a position or a policy that just doesn't exist, that there's no grounding or no truth to. And so when we're talking about the US brand, it's not just the US as a entity, as an idea, the shining light on the hill type approach. Again, I'm sorry if I sound like a stuck record, but it's that economic impact. It's that which is really one of the drivers, which is the power of America, is the fact it's the heart of the capitalist system. And again, with the withdrawing of interest and funding from governmental entities that ordinarily would look at this, I do fear that business is going to have to go it on their own a little bit. Certainly US business, less of an issue, I think, in other places. So I don't know if I came with any solutions there, Jocelyn. I'm not even sure if I answered your question, if I'm completely honest.
Well, what I'm hearing is for it takes money to make money kind of thing. And if for businesses out there, for anybody interested in the future of America and leadership, maybe what you will hear is it will make you more money if you help protect the interest of trust and safety and the reputation of who we are and what we stand for and all of the businesses out there. It's like when I was a kid, McDonald's was the coolest thing, and we had Happy Meals, and there was this just like feeling of goodness and play. And I don't know if it's just because I got older and grew out of it. Are there Happy Meals anymore? I feel like this is just one example of this emblematic company that is now kind of seen as just like, it's fast food. It's not that great.
I'd slightly caveat what you. Yes, a little, just a touch.
Yes.
McDonald's financially is smashing it, Jocelyn. They're smashing it. I don't think you need to feel bad for McDonald's, Jocelyn. I think what is quite interesting, and I have seen happen incredibly often, both internationally and domestically, is brands, because there's a loyal, active, engaged audience, are more and more being dragged into things that they invariably don't really have any involvement in. And it's what I call spike to strike. It's done by influencers that are attempting to gain clout or audience. So they'll put out a salacious thing in the hope that the company responds. So therefore, pushing that post across millions of that brand's audience, it's likely then made newsworthy as a result of that. They get the credit, they might financially monetize it, do a whole bunch of things. And that's sort of lone actors. What we're also seeing is politicians. The last time a politician criticized an issue or a problem, just keep your ear open to whether or not they try and attach it to a specific brand. I would bet that sort of 9 times out of 10, they do. And it's not necessarily because that brand is the worst at it. It's not necessarily because it might not be because the brand's not doing it either. Don't get me wrong. They're not all, saints for sure. But I think, again, politicians are recognizing that to build a policy platform to help it relate to the constituents by leveraging the credibility, the awareness of a company can have real value. And you also see that in conflicts. So with the Israel-Gaza conflict, you're seeing, again, significant amounts of brands being dragged into that. You're seeing it with the immigration, with allegations that companies are actively helping or even, phoning up on their employees for ICE to come and sweep them out of factories and whatnot. All of this is just complete falsehoods, but it's useful because it gains headlines, because it leverages the hard work of brands to build that awareness, to build that understanding of who they are and what they do, and it's being co-opted for other purposes and other means. So yeah, it's a real struggle. And again, that's one of the ways in which inadvertently they become collateral to actually geopolitical conflicts as well, in terms of, actual kinetic issues.
Oof. Have you seen?
I don't get booked for children's parties, Jocelyn. I
come to dinner. Have you seen I'm trying to think of what, I keep asking you the same questions, like, what do you do? But if you have, let's say somebody is blaming a Home Depot or something, and that they're spreading lies about a company calling up ICE, how do you deal with, like, do you make a joke about it? What are the possible tactics or strategies when it's a hot topic and it's affecting you right now?
Yeah, I would certainly caution against humor in instances like that. So again, it's one of those things. If I start at the individual level, right? So the spike to strike at individual influencer level, who's trying to make a name for themselves, again, it's about working out the environment. Hopefully you've pre-mapped it, you've understand, is this likely to resonate amongst my key audiences? Is this going to get wider traction? Is this a known entity that can actually command some sort of media engagement? Is this going to grow? And then it's very hard, whether you're in the military or government, and even more so, I would argue, in business, to then advise, do nothing. So I've come up with a term. It's not really, I probably haven't coined it, I'll be honest, but I don't know where I got it from. But so I tell people, what we need in this moment is strategic patience. And really, it's about putting a watch on it and keeping an eye, but ultimately not engaging. Because actually, if you've done not the pre-bunking, but the preemption and the proactive bit of resilience building, your audience will do it for you. Your organic audiences, your stakeholders will come
Very
out.
good.
Yeah,
Resilience.
and I've got a particular client who has a very, very loyal following. Anytime, even with significant videos of nonsense, one got like 2-3 million views on TikTok. The comments overwhelmingly was 3/4 in defense of the brand. And so it really shows, if you're able to build that brand loyalty, that you're seen to inform, to educate, to be part of people's lives in a meaningful way, they will step to for you. And that's really where we want to get to from a corporate perspective.
You also see this in personal, like, influencer space. So I'll give you an example of Andrew Huberman had developed such a strong brand and a name for himself, science communicator, scientist, neuroscientist, and very long, in-depth, videos trying to educate people. Thank you for your interest in science. This is sign off. And he was accused of this very bad behavior in this very, like, a bombshell report. And it was fascinating watching the comments. He never addressed it, not once that I know of. It was just silence on the matter, kept producing the videos, kept putting out the content, and just didn't say anything. And when people would have fights in the comments, the people who are, bought into his brand the strongest are always up in defense. So it's really quite interesting to see that. And to your point, if you have a strong relationship and you've developed that trust with folks, they will stand by you through thick and thin, whether or not the information is true.
And it's also, one of the, yes, you can borrow that, Sean.
I love it. The spike to strike, I love this too. Yeah, we're going to make sure.
Gosh, I should trademark them before I came on. Goodness.
Yeah. Oh, we're not going to run. We're not going to run as fast as we can.
Put it on a shirt.
No, go for it. But I think actually there's a wonderful analogy, Jocelyn, to the sort of example you gave there. If you're walking down a street, and this is almost a daily occurrence for me in New York, someone who's mentally unstable or unwell, or someone who's had way too much to drink or is on drugs, they might throw a slur or a curse at you or whatever. And then if you engage with them, and then you try and persuade them, and this person is still, being particularly nasty and awful to your face. For the people walking past, do you think they just see one lunatic, or do they see two? And I think people need to recognize, certainly on a brand's perspective, or if you're on a pedestal, if you have the power dynamic, right? You've got an audience, you've got a point of view, you're doing well, whether it's a corporate or an influencer, the worst thing you can do is take yourself down to someone else's level. And you will not win. You cannot win. That person, that troll, has got all day to come at you, right? It's like the old saying in Afghanistan that, you know, the Taliban would say, you might have the watches, but we have the time. That is absolutely apt and appropriate when we start thinking about trolls and malicious activity online. You just ain't going to win. You're not going to persuade them. Why are you even trying? What you need to do is indirectly work around them. The moment you confront them, it turns into an argument. It turns into a screaming match, a shouting match. Regardless of how sensible and what tone you take, it just demeans. So again, unless there's very specific circumstances, it makes absolutely no sense to engage in that way.
How do you personally filter for misinformation, especially if you're tired or it's about a topic that is close to the heart or emotional?
Oh gosh, well, this is the other thing. Actually, I will answer your question, Justin, but you sort of triggered a thought. Is actually the internet was built by engineers, but it is a deeply human experience, and I think we sometimes forget the human squishy bit. And I certainly not on here. I know that psychology is covered extensively, and you've both got, you know, lots of experience and credentials in that space, but the constant drive to try and find tech to solve tech problems, or tech to try and solve human problems, I think is deeply frustrating. So when you ask that question about how do I safeguard against it, I'm as likely to get duped as anyone else. Goodness. I mean, I think there was a really interesting study looking at deepfakes by a company called iProv, who does sort of authentication or verification of people. I think they did a survey of 2,000 people. They did this test where they put deepfake images and deepfake videos in front of people alongside genuine images and asked them to just highlight where, you know, one was fake and one was not. 0.1% of people got 100% on that. 0.1%. We're all rubbish at it, Jocelyn, right? So I think it's one of those things where it really depends, right? If you're planning on making an important decision off information, I think that's when you need to, as Daniel Kahneman would talk about, you know, kick into your tier 2. Don't rely on heuristics. Don't rely on gut. You know, go and seek. You know, as a former intelligence analyst, I would, even in a deeply variable, unknown environment, I would still seek at least 3 bits of separate information to then make some form of assessment from that as a bare minimum. And so for any decision making, I think that's how I try and operate, how I try and think. Anything that triggers me, I'm kind of like, that's a bit sus. I will dig into, I will try and find the source for, but it's exhausting. Who's got the time? And one would have hoped that the LLMs would be doing this for us, but they're ghastly as well.
Okay, folks, try to find at least 3 sources. I know you said who's got the time, but if there were anything that you could develop, or is there anything that you know of that can help people filter misinformation that's out there?
At the end of the day, the way the world works, you are always going to have to defer and impart some trust in others in order to remain informed. And I, as much as it is out of fashion, I almost don't want to call it the mainstream media, because that's such a loaded term now. But they have standards at the very least. They will let you know when they've got something wrong. And again, I think the challenge you have now, I think there was a Pew study that said of the most prominent news influencers online, 77% of them have never even been near a newsroom, let alone received any formal journalistic or reporting training. 77%. That's why it's important. I love news as entertainment on social, with some of the nonsense and the crazy opinions and everything else. Love it. Who hasn't had that guilty pleasure of going down that Daily Mail column of shame on their digital edition? We've all been there. We've all had low points. But I think it's sort of, like I say, if you've got a decision to make, if you're actually having to form an opinion or a view that you care about, then it's worth investing the time either in a subscription to behind a paywall, and the reason why you have to pay for it because they've got people actually digging into the detail of the issue or the problem. You get what you pay for, ultimately, I think, to be honest. You know, we need to make the case and the defense of expertise and experience. They're not infallible, and for some reason, anytime someone's fallible, we seem to want to tear them down. They just have to be wrong a couple of times, and suddenly they've lost credibility. How do we move forward as a society, or even in science or academia, unless we can make mistakes, which is deeply ironic given the pedestal that we put entrepreneurs on. You know, all these startup CEOs, you know, break things, move quickly, do this, that, and the other. Apparently it's fine for them. But if you're if you're in the information game, apparently not so much. So I think, you know, just have a little bit of tolerance of the odd error. No one's fallible, which is why multiple sources is important. And I think also just try and broaden your sources as well. So, you know, if something's perceived to be quite a right-wing view or publication, offset it with a bit of a left and sort of just see if there's a bit of correlation, even if it's just the facts.
Is there anything else that you're working on or want to promote or give a shout out to? I'm
constantly tinkering with different ideas and capabilities, exactly to your consistent question of, well, what do we do about it, Simon? I'm working on it, Justin. I'm working on it. But I think one of the areas that certainly I'm spending a lot of time on at the moment is a really interesting idea around, or certainly it's a more sophisticated way of approaching and surfacing inauthentic and coordinated behavior and influence online. And I think where it's quite distinct to, you know, what are often really quite rubbish bot detection, or it's sort of cookie cutter behavioral templates that seek to identify known networks or campaigns, it's really taking a series of technical flags agnostic to previous behavior and applying those to a series, again, of agnostic objects of influence that allow you to, on account level and on a user level, identify small outliers in probability as to whether or not that is part of the norm, as part of the normal conversation in the universe of the topic that you're looking at. And by effectively then building those up, you know, one account has suddenly triggered about 6 flags. 1 or 2 on their own doesn't necessarily mean anything. But all of a sudden, you're starting to see this sort of build-up of residue around a particular account. And then, funnily enough, that account behaves in exactly the same way or in an incredibly similar way to 20 others. And suddenly, you've identified a network. And I think I'm almost at the point of getting this. I think the last trial run we did of it, we got through about 7,000 posts within 40 minutes and surfaced about 50 communities, suspicious communities, that for an intelligence analyst would act as a start point. There's one other thing I think that I'd love to sort of flag, and it's not something we've necessarily talked to, but if you think about the sort of laydown of all the different technology and vendors that are out there, there is a huge glaring gap that, again, and you talk, this is relevant for government as well, audience analysis. One of the reasons why adversaries are quite so successful and continually seemingly to be successful is because they're experimenting so much. They're effectively using what you had mentioned, Sean. They're capturing that data. They're targeting specific communities and groups within certain markets. They're testing, they're iterating, they're seeing what works. They're building deep profiles of specific communities that they might be able to mobilize or engage or enrage or sow division within. And they're doing it by test and adjust. Right, we're not committing that amount of level of effort and energy on a consistent basis as they are, and so one of the other things that I'm involved in, or you know, increasingly, is looking at how do you apply in a scalable way an approach of using psychometrics and social science modeling to large unstructured data sets to help understand behaviors, but also to fundamentally predict reactions and behaviors in the short term as well. And so watch this space. Certainly those two things, if any of your listeners or yourselves would like to get into that, honestly, I could talk at you, probably not with you, but at you for hours. So do please get in touch.
How do we get in touch with you?
So I'm an enigma, Jocelyn. I am, for those in the UK, a Scarlet Pimpernel. They seek me here. They seek me there. LinkedIn is probably the is probably. I must admit, I am somewhat of a LinkedIn junkie. I don't necessarily respond very quickly to the messages. Probably within a week. But yeah, if you hit me up on LinkedIn, and I'm sure if I ask you very nicely, you might be able to pop a link into the show notes.
We'll do a little tiny extra commission for that.
Start with the mean. He said honest, the cost. We're going to come
right.
on
Talking
the
to the guy in business, so you're speaking my language at least, Jocelyn.
That's right. We've talked the whole time about the bottom, like making money, what makes money, you know. So now I'm learning my lesson.
Well, but yeah.
Simon, thank you so much.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you, both of you.
I've come to talk with you again. Come and be inside my head. Cancel me, cancel me. I got things to say, you can cancel me. Cancel me, cancel me. I got things to say, you can cancel me. Cancel me, cancel me. I got things to say, you can cancel me. It's only a matter of time till we all get canceled, I'm saying. It's only a matter of time till we all get canceled, I'm saying. It's only a matter of time till we all get canceled, I'm saying. Cancel me, cancel me, cancel me. I got things to say, you can cancel me. Cancel me, cancel me. I got things to say, you can cancel me. Cancel me, cancel me. I got things to say, you can cancel me.